Well, shooters and reloaders out there, Fortune Cookie 45LC coming to you from the Hot Lead Zone. And back in the year 1972, the early part of 72, I bought my first handgun because of the recommendations of a very renowned shooter at the time, Jeff Cooper, who was promoting the 1911 pistol in 45 ACP caliber. So I bought one of these in Series 70. And this gun eventually became customized by a gunsmith, and a Series 80 slide was put on it, and all the parts were changed out to a customized piece called a comp gun. Now, this is only one design of compensator that came along back in those days. The race to get shorter and shorter split times was what drove the development of compensators. There were some that had more than one port, different sizes, this kind of thing, different designs. There was a C-shaped one, there was a 3-ported one, all kinds of different compensators came along. Some that just had the top portion, there wasn't a bottom portion for a spring guide, this kind of thing. Notice the bluing was worn off because of some of the early holsters, but the ones that came along later didn't do much grabbing of the end of the gun, so that allowed more speed on the draw. So this video is about thoughts on the compensated 1911. Well, today we happen to have a Father's Day shoot, so I went ahead and shot the 1911 comp gun. So this is interesting because on this date I only shot powder-coated bullets. So we disassembled our comp gun. This is the 45 ACP barrel. It is a match barrel that is longer than stock, and it has a compensator screwed onto it that fits onto the front of the slide. And it's milled so that the two of them mate together. Well, the compensator, the idea behind that was we would have major power loads with a lot of gas, and the gas would blow up through the top of the compensator straight up, and that would force the muzzle to stay down for faster recovery shots. Plus, the extra weight provided by the compensator right out there in front gives you the stabilizing effect for recoil control. Now, the problem with compensators was they always leaded heavily. And you see the machine marks of the inside of the compensator there. There's no lead in there. Well, the reason why is I cleaned that out before, and with the powder-coated bullets, you just don't get the leading. It used to be that I would shoot, say, 500 rounds of 45 ACP in an evening, and when we got back from the range, there would be big chunks of lead inside the compensator. Even shooting molly-coated bullets, we would have big chunks of lead in there. Doesn't happen with the powder-coated bullets, so I'm pleased to report that. It's kind of nice. Well, there was a little bit in there, but it didn't take much to get that out. And the barrel cleaned up real well. It only took 20 strokes to get that barrel clean. Show that to you. Very nice and clean barrel there. We've had some real tough lead deposits in some of these areas before. With the powder-coated bullets, it's nice. Now you see the slide cleaned up very nice, and you can see all the wear areas, all the bare areas of metal where the rubbing happens. And that cleaned up very nicely. And of course the frame cleaned up very nice. Notice the polished feed ramp there. Everything cleaned up very nicely in there. We don't need to do a complete strip of all the parts this time. But there we go. So to reassemble the barrel and slide, first we have to take the slide and the barrel and go ahead and place the barrel back into the slide. So we get the bushing back in, and then the little spring retainer has to go back in, like so. And then we have to straighten up the bushing and then get the compensator lined up. But before we go ahead, we need to take a small Allen wrench and go in there and tighten the little set screw for the compensator. Go ahead and put the back end of the forward end of the two-piece guide rod into the guide rod channel there, and then go ahead and put your recoil spring back in. Now what we have here is an 18.5 pound recoil spring, which is popular for major power. And then we have a shock buff made out of some kind of polymer back in those days. And what that did was it cushioned the impact of the recoil when we're doing that major power stuff. And the idea here is to compress this spring and keep it under control so you don't lose it across the room. And then to get the screw and the two-piece guide rod to line up so you can tighten that back up. Now I like to use another instrument to come in here and help get that lined up while I'm feeding that back together until you feel it actually join. Sometimes this takes a extra hand, like right there, to push on the, there it is. So now we've got the two-piece guide rods capturing the spring, and now we tighten up the two-piece guide rod and give that a little snugness. And you see there, the recoil spring is back in. The link is free to move. We got our shock buff. This slide is ready to go back on the frame. Now back in those days, we loved Shooter's Choice gun grease, and I bought about 6 of these, so I still have plenty of Shooter's Choice gun grease. And what you do is just put a little bead of Shooter's Choice gun grease right there in the slide rails. Don't need a lot, just a little bit, like so. Now I'm actually doing this left-handed, so that's why it's awkward, but there you go. Now with any 45, now all of you Glock shooters out there are laughing right now because the thing just falls apart. Whereas this thing, you have to gyrate it, but we got used to that. Now, so you can see the link in there. So the idea is to get that link lined up with the opening, and then put the now you need to get this slide lock back in there, capturing the link. And then you gotta get it lined up with the little index mark for the slide lock to be retained. And now we've got the gun back together. You see? Very stiff action. Try that with oily hands. And then if you like, you can put a little Shooter's Choice gun grease on the barrel here where the bushing is. You don't need a lot, just a little bit. And there you go. Check to make sure it's clear, and then we can. 1911 trigger was one of the big reasons why this gun was so popular, because what you have there is a real crisp single action trigger that could be worked by a gunsmith to give you pulls as light as 1.25 pounds, 1.5 pounds. Plus, they make it durable. The gunsmith over there did a great job. And you see, it's very crisp and light. There's no double action type of pull or stacking or anything. It's just a crisp single action trigger. Plus, the trigger reset on a 1911 is one of the shortest that you'll find, which was again one of the reasons why this gun dominated the IPSC sports back in the 70s and early 80s. Ask shooters like Rob Latham and Brian Enos, and they'll tell you all about the 1911 and all their escapades with this gun. Now today you hear a lot about what they call the modern technique. But back in the 70s and 80s, we tried everything. So there's really nothing new. This idea of having the grip where the thumbs line up and you have the thumbs like this and you're wrapped around like that, whether you go in front of the trigger guard or underneath, that was done back then. And we did the isosceles, we did the weaver first, and the weaver was found to be wanting and went to the isosceles, and then we modified the isosceles and did different things with it and stances and all that kind of thing. It was all tried back then. So I don't know about the modern technique being modern, but it was just all from the development of all the work that was done back then. And as for high capacity magazines, that was a development in IPSC when the desirability to save on magazine changes took hold, and we started getting double stack magazines in thicker frames and this kind of thing, up to 20 rounds, even more. The Browning High Power was one of the early double stack magazines, and there was already polymer guns that were available in other types of rifles and pistols. So that preceded the coming of the Glocks. But the John Browning design of the 1911 and then the Browning High Power, the whole idea of the pivoting barrel dropping down to allow the slide to go ahead and run its cycle, all of that kind of thing was already in place and led to the development of all the types of semi-automatic pistols that we see today. Shooting industry started to actually make and incorporate some of the features of our comp guns into the production guns, making everything within reach of the shooters today. And many more competitions came to the fore, such as the Bianchi Cup, which also actually incorporated some of the principles of accuracy and PPC shooting with speed shooting and this kind of thing, plus movers and all this kind of thing for audience appeal. The steel challenge, again, the ringing steel so that spectators didn't have to strain their eyes to see the bullet holes in the A zones. The coming of IDPA, the concealed carry, the US PSA came on after IPSC, all of those things to get to today. Now we're doing 3-gun and running all over the place. And all of this kind of thing all stem from the action sports that we had before. So you see the guide rod and the longer barrel compensator. And so we had other parts added like this slide guard that stopped you from rubbing and taking the velocity to slide down. We had a mag well and the extended beaver tail, the hammer, lightened trigger, all these kind of things. Checkering was done and all this kind of thing. Bigger magazine release buttons, all of those things came on before, so that today, if you have guns that have some of those features, still have to appreciate the work that was done back in the 1970s and 80s, where the development of race guns was done, and a lot of those things were applied to the guns we have today, and you don't have to spend money for a custom gunsmith to do it. Anyway, there's our 1911 all cleaned up. We'll wipe it off.